Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. On behalf of the Center for Policing Equity, I'm grateful to share this space with faith leaders, community members, advocates, and partners who are committed to building safer, healthier, and more just communities. Before we begin, I want to let everyone know that today's session is being recorded. After the webinar, we'll share the recording along with any additional resources and materials discussed during today's conversation, so you'll have an opportunity to revisit and share them with others. We encourage you to engage with curiosity and respect, ask your questions in the question and answer function, and reflect on how the ideas shared today can inform your work and partnerships. Now we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to tell you a little bit about CPE. The Center for Policing Equity is a racial justice nonprofit that protects, supports, and empowers communities, particularly Black and Brown communities, to redesign their public safety systems. CPE provides leaders with data, stories, and relationships to facilitate change that's bold, innovative, and lasting. We do science to promote justice. CPE gathers and analyzes data on behaviors within public safety systems and uses those data to help communities achieve safer policing outcomes. Our goal is to make policing less racist, less deadly, and less omnipresent. We believe we can forge the path to justice by redesigning public safety systems to better keep communities safe. Now, at this time, it is my pleasure to turn things over to our moderator, Melissa McKee, who will guide us through today's conversation. Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Candace, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm really glad to welcome you into this conversation on what it truly means for communities to be safe. It's a question that seems simple on the surface, but the more closely we look, the more we realize that safety isn't just the absence of violence. It's the presence of stability, opportunity, and dignity. It's the understanding that every person deserves conditions that allow them not only to survive, but to thrive. Today's webinar, brought together by the Center for Policing Equity and Salvation and Social Justice, gives us space to focus on this bigger definition, one that is shaped by the lived experiences of Black families, Black neighborhoods, and Black faith communities across New Jersey. These are communities that know deeply that safety begins long before harm occurs. It begins with housing that is secure and affordable. It begins with access to healthcare and mental health support. It begins with young people who are nurtured, encouraged, and connected to opportunity. Safety is something that has to be built, tended to, and protected over time. Across New Jersey, we're seeing concrete examples of what this can look like in practice. Faith institutions, in particular, are stepping into their long-standing role as anchors in their communities, spaces where people can gather, be seen, and be supported. They're leading efforts in violence interruption, restorative justice, housing stability, and maternal health. These are community-driven initiatives grounded in lived experience, cultural understanding, and the belief that people already hold the knowledge and wisdom needed to keep one another safe. And Black faith institutions have been doing this work for generations. Long before today's policy conversations, long before the language of community safety even existed in its current form, Black churches and faith leaders were creating networks of care, mutual aid, and protection. They've been hubs where people find support when systems fall short. They've been spaces where grief and hope can coexist, where young people are guided and families find resources, advocacy, and belonging. This work isn't new, but it is necessary and it is urgent. Our hope is that today you'll leave with more than inspiration, although that is certainly important. We also want you to walk away with practical insights, ideas, and approaches that faith communities, congregations, and local leaders can bring back to their own neighborhoods. Whether you're thinking about launching a new program, strengthening existing partnerships, or advocating for policies that create more equitable conditions, there is a role for everyone in advancing community safety. So as we begin, I invite you to listen for the through line, that safety is not something delivered to communities. It's something that's created with and within them. And Black faith communities have always been and continue to be the heart of that creation. So again, thank you for being with us. And let's get started now with introductions of our panelists. So turning to our panelists, I would just love for you each to let the audience know who you are and what brings you into this space. Let's start with you, Diana.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. I'm Diana Rogers, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Greater Mount Zion Community Development Corporation in the city of Trenton. We are associated with Greater Mount Zion AME Church in Trenton. And we are a nonprofit organization that focuses on health and wellness, housing, community education, food security, and workforce development. We come to this space today to discuss our work around maternal infant health, particularly Black maternal health, and the challenges and the inequities that are experienced by Black birthing moms in the state of New Jersey, as well as the inequities families experience with housing. And so I come to this space today to talk about what it means to be safe in those spaces. And I'm glad to be here.
Rita, how about you take it away?
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. Good afternoon, everyone. First, let me say I'm sorry that I'm not on camera, but at least you have a photo to see what I look like. It is an honor and pleasure to be a part of this panel discussion. Again, my name is Rita Onitiri, and I am the Program Director and Development Assistant at Salvation and Social Justice. Salvation and Social Justice is a faith rooted nonprofit organization, a statewide leader in policy, advocacy, and direct service provider in Trenton, New Jersey. We are committed to bringing about a transformation of communities and systems that impact Black residents every day. We are grounded in the belief that faith must be lived out in action. To that end, we have worked to abolish structural racism and advance restorative justice by liberating public policy theologically. SNSJ led the campaign to free thousands of incarcerated people from New Jersey's deadly prisons due to COVID 19, um, making it the singular most decarceration event in New Jersey's history. Moreover, SNSJ played a pivotal role in community organizing and advocating for youth justice and policing alternatives in New Jersey. Most notably, our organization helped drive the statewide initiative that led to the Restorative and Transformative Justice for Youth and Communities Pilot Program bill. That legislation directed $8.4 million to establish a 2-year pilot program across 4 cities in New Jersey, creating restorative justice hubs designed to serve youth and communities, keeping young people out of youth prisons and connecting them and their families to resources. And through bold policy and advocacy, Salvation and Social Justice led efforts to advance the Seabrook, Washington Community Led Crises Response Act, redirecting 12 million into communities to build a life-saving, care-centered alternative to policing. So just in all, Since our founding just 5 years ago, Salvation and Social Justice have helped direct nearly $90 million back into Black communities, fueling solutions led by the very people most impacted. So I come to this work particularly to do the work that I just mentioned, and that is to transform communities and also to redirect resources back to communities. Thank you.
I guess that falls to me. Thank you so much, Melissa, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Niles Wilson, and I am the Senior Director for Law Enforcement Initiatives here at the Center for Policing Equity. Prior to coming to the Center for Policing Equity, I was a police officer with the City of Newark, New Jersey, where I spent 27 years there serving my community, working my way up from patrol officer all the way up to deputy police director at one point. And when I retired, I was the chief of staff for the public safety director and the chief of police. So my policing career is vast. I've had experience in everything from patrol functions to criminal investigations, internal investigations, training, community affairs, clergy affairs, and just a host of other administrative functions and investigative functions that I've performed throughout my career. So I had a really great opportunity to serve the community in the city where I was born and raised, and just kind of give back through public service. In addition to that, for 30 years, I've been the pastor of the Greater Cornerstone Baptist Church in the city of East Orange, New Jersey, where I'm the second pastor in the church's 74-year history. And I've had the opportunity there to work within the urban context of urban ministry, addressing issues such as justice, drug addictions, food insecurities, housing insecurities, working with my congregation and working with other community leaders to try to provide just some basic services to people who have access to no other services. So that's what I bring to this. Here at CPE, I've been here now so almost 6 years, and I work with law enforcement agencies across the country that are interested in doing equity work. Chiefs of police, police commissioners, police leaders, sheriffs who say, listen, we want our policing to be more equitable. How can we do that? And so my team works with them to analyze their data. We look at their data, find out where they have their disparities in terms of equity, and then we help them with solutions to solve those particular problems. And now that we're moving to a new model, the new model is exactly what we're talking about here today, where we're looking at the totality of all circumstances. We're looking upstream. What is causing people to even have to contact the police? Because unfortunately, in many of our major cities, the police have become the default setting for all government services. And many times the police aren't either trained, equipped, or responsible for those services. And so we help police leaders find ways to come up with solutions to solve those particular problems. And so thanks for having me. I look forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Niles and Diana and Rita. I hope the audience is as curious as I am and is intrigued by the breadth of experience and perspective that you all bring into this conversation. I heard some of this already in your introductions, but I just want to really begin by breaking down the work. And by doing so, I would love to hear from each of you how you define community safety beyond just the absence of violence. What does it truly mean for communities to be safe? And Niles, let's start with you since you're already warmed up.
Thank you. Well, for me, public safety is everything that affects a person's life. So we're talking health care, education, food, employment opportunities. All of these things impact the way a person lives their life, the choices they make, the pressures they face, the decisions that they have to make, and how they feel even about themselves. So in my opinion, and in my experience, the most effective public safety systems are an integration of both law enforcement, public health, housing, education, even behavioral health, and of course, faith communities. All of those things working in a synergistic way, help create a healthy person. Healthy people create healthy families. Healthy families create healthy communities. Healthy communities create a healthy society, and therefore you have public safety. Any of those things that are off base or damaged or dysfunctional can create problems that create more public safety issues.
Diana and Retha, do
I,
you have anything to add to
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
So I wholeheartedly agree with Niles. A safe community, beyond the absence of violence, is a community that is thriving, where there is truly nothing missing. And to piggyback off of what Niles was saying, if you are a family that's stressed about your housing, if you're stressed about education, if you're stressed about your food security, you are going to have a community where people are trying to figure things out. And to his point, the absence of any of those things will mean that the community is not necessarily safe, and and when we talk about safety, absence of violence, it's like, from an economic standpoint, from all that educational, when any of those things are missing, it makes a community unstable. So a community that is safe beyond violence is one that is stable. They're not dealing with instability. Um, and families are not dealing with, interpersonal conflicts, when they have all of those things in place that they need. And so it's critical that we're able to provide resources and opportunities for families to be able to flourish, to be able to thrive. um, and when you have the things that you need, you see less violence in communities.
Thank you, Diane. Just a few things. So, from my perspective, safety is not simply the absence of violence, which we've said already, but it is the presence of justice actively working in the lives of people and communities. So, true safety means that every person is treated with dignity, where their humanity is affirmed and their voices are valued, not silenced. It is a condition where families experience stability, as Diana mentioned, but not just in housing or income, but in relationships, health, and the assurance that systems will not harm them, but instead protect and uplift them. Safety also requires real, accessible opportunities, which I think was mentioned before, pathways to education, meaningful employment, civic participation, and the ability to shape the policies that governs one's life. In this understanding, safety is communal and transformative. It is rooted in a faith that calls us beyond control and punishment toward restoration and liberation, where communities are resourced, not policed into survival, and where justice repairs harm rather than perpetuates it. And so to be truly safe is to live in a society where dignity is non negotiable, stability is sustained, and opportunity is abundant, so that all people, especially those historically marginalized, can thrive and walk fully into the promise of freedom. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for deepening that definition of safety. Diane, I want to turn directly to you for a second because your work makes clear that safety begins long before a crisis occurs. So, how do housing stability and maternal health directly contribute to safer communities?
Yeah, so for housing and maternal health, and when we talk to our moms, um, when they express, and if we could step back a bit, in the city of Trenton, we we do not have opportunities for moms to be able to birth in the city of Trenton, right? And many of those moms also are facing housing instability. And so when you partner housing instability, the inability to be able to birth in the city where you live, you have to go outside of that city. You have, challenges with the healthcare system. It creates, again, a series of stressors for those birthing moms. And when you have more stress, you have and you have more stress, you are impacting your ability to have gainful employment, education, and as Rita talked about, those community ties are lessened. And so when we are able to make sure that there is stable housing, when we're able to make sure that moms are able to birth in spaces and environments that are safe for them, that are welcoming to them, that we are not just, as we talk about, as we're building out this birthing center, catching babies, but we're talking about their overall health, mental health, emotional health, social health. All of those pieces together create the environment that becomes a safer environment for them. So when we talk about things starting long before crisis, we're talking about addressing that housing stability. We're talking about ensuring that moms have employment, that moms have childcare, that their children are in quality education, educational opportunities. Like all of those opportunities are available for them. And it starts, again, long before moms are birthing, ensuring that those things are in place so that those children are coming into communities that has everything that they need. Um, and so that stress of birthing, and that the ability to reduce those rates of Black maternal mortality rates, we are able to address those in the work that we do. So thinking about it long before the crisis arise. When we put those pieces in place, um, we are prepared. We're prepared if things were to occur in those communities.
Thanks, Diane. It looked like you might have had another thing to say.
Oh, no, okay. I'm
Okay.
good. I'm good.
Okay. Something that came up for me when you were sharing is something that I've encountered in my own work, and that's that these systems that we encounter during these moments in our lives often operate in such a siloed fashion. And so I'm wondering from all of you how we can help people see these not as separate systems, but as public safety strategies that must and need to and can work together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you want me to start that, or I can.
Whoever feels inspired. Yes.
Yeah, I can jump in there because one of the things that we talk about, the social determinants of health, right? Um, for our moms. And when we talk about those social determinants of health, all of it is connected. So again, if you are a birthing mom and housing becomes an issue, if you are a birthing mom, childcare becomes an issue, if you're a birthing mom, employment, all of that becomes a challenge for you. If any of those things are missing, then it makes it much more difficult for that mom to have a healthy birth, that mom to live in, a healthy, stable community. And so we try to help people to understand that not one of those things can be absent, right? So it can't work in a silo, right? We have to look at it holistically because it impacts the entire family. If again, if mom is stressing about, childcare, and you have multiple children in the household and you have older children, those are things mom is dealing with, being pregnant and then trying to, work with, making sure that the older children are being taken care of. The older children have opportunities. So we can't just focus on one thing without looking at it in a more holistic way. So I can't look at a mom that's giving birth and not worry about how she's eating and her nutrition and her health care. I can't look at a birthing mom and not worry about what's happening with, if she has multiple children, what's happening with each and every one of those children. I can't look at a birthing mom and not be concerned about the child's education. I can't look at a birthing mom and not be concerned about her employment, whether she has a job when she comes back from birthing her babies. Like, all of it is connected, and it is all connected to safety in those communities.
Thank you. Do either of the other panelists have anything they'd like to add?
I'll just add that when you look at housing and even healthcare, right, displaced families, they face so many changes that make it difficult for them to even secure even the mindset of safety, right? Children have to keep changing schools. Adults start losing employments or changing employments, and then their neighborhoods become fragmented, or they even experience things like social isolation. All of these things create stress, conflict, uh, economic desperations, sometimes causing people to have to deal with these external stressors that impact their decision making. And so, if you find a doctor here, but your housing isn't good, so now you have to move across town, and now you can't go to that healthcare facility. You have to find someone new. All of these extra things, if they're looked at in terms of silos, then what happens is people remain fragmented. But when you look at them as one greater system for public safety and for the well-being, total well-being of the human being. Somebody mentioned the humanity earlier, right? If we look at people in terms of their humanity, then we realize that systems really are supposed to be designed to serve. People shouldn't experience systems. They should participate in those systems because they're supposed to serve them. And so when you separate all of these things, people wind up becoming displaced. They wind up becoming damaged by the very system that are supposed to protect them and help them. And so I think it's important that we look at it holistically and not keep things siloed in pieces, because once you do that, then people become fragmented by the fragmentation of the system itself.
That's good. And also, I think, by when things become fragmented, we break communal ties, right? And it is those communal ties that help to build community, and it's community that helps to build a safe environment. Um, so it's important, again, to look at those pieces as whole, not as individual pieces.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
I was
Oh,
going to say I don't have anything to add. I think they really covered that pretty well.
that's okay, Risa, because I actually have a question for you. Jumping ahead from infancy to youth justice, I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit about how restorative justice hubs for youth address the root conditions that often lead to harm in the first place.
Sure. Thank you for that question. This is a passion of mine. So, restorative justice hubs for youth are powerful because they intentionally shift the focus from reacting to harm to transforming the conditions that produce harm in the first place. So instead of asking, like, what rule was broken and how should we punish, these hubs ask deeper, more human questions. What happened? What does this young person need? What support does this family and community need to heal and thrive? So, as faith leaders, we know that the call to justice is not simply about responding to harm, it is about creating the conditions where harm is less likely to occur in the first place. So, restorative justice hubs challenge us to move from a punishment centered mindset to a ministry of prevention, healing, and transformation. So instead of asking, what did this young person do wrong? These hubs invite us to ask, what happened to them and what do they need to be whole? Because the truth is, many of our young people who come in contact with the justice system are not just acting out. They are responding to deeper conditions, instability at home, unmet mental health needs, disconnection from school, lack of opportunity, and exposure to trauma. When we respond only with punishment, we may quiet the behavior, but we leave the root wounded. And what is wounded will rise again. So restorative justice serve as spaces of healing and hope. They surround young people and their families with support. Like I mentioned, mental health care, education, mentoring, job pathways, and community connection, so that stability replaces chaos and opportunity begins to break cycles. They create spaces where young people are seen, heard, and held accountable in ways that restore dignity rather than strip them away. And as people of faith, we should recognize this work because it reflects the very heart of our faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Retha. I'm so glad that I asked that question. I'm going to shift our conversation just a little bit now, though, to talk about lived experience and its connection to policy work. We often talk about how policy can open doors and shift systems and signal what's possible. But we also know that policy alone isn't what moves people. Lived experience, storytelling, and the everyday work of community leadership are what truly change hearts and minds. In your work, you all sit at that intersection between these two forces, the structural and the deeply personal. So as we move into this next part of the discussion, I'd love to explore how you navigate that balance in practice and what it looks like to bring both policy and lived experience into your approach. So starting with anyone who feels led to begin, would you share what ways lived experience has shaped the direction of your initiatives?
So yeah, so lived experience for the work that we do with Back in Our Hands, which is the birthing center that we're building out in Trenton. We recognize and the stories that our moms share about their experience. It's insight that data alone cannot capture, right? So people are always talking about data points, right? But their lived experience, the data cannot always speak to what they are going through. So when we talk about lived experience and we talk about how we shape our programming, how we shape the services that we provide, how we shape and look for the resources that are needed, it is based on those lived experiences that are shared by the moms. And when we look at how can we, as a community, how can we as, faith leaders, how can we work with, legislators in terms of providing the necessary supports to reduce the Black maternal health, Black maternal mortality and morbidity rate in the state, and those pieces that impact communities that experience high rates of violence. It is those people who live in the community, our neighbors, who are able to provide the necessary stories and also able to provide the examples of how you can change things, right? If we're not talking to the people who are most impacted, what are we doing? You understand what I'm saying? So it is necessary that we hear those stories, that it's necessary that we understand the lived experience so that we're not creating programming for the sake of creating programming, right? We're not doing things just to check a box, but we are truly providing resource and support that will be impactful to the very people who will benefit from the resources and make significant change.
I
For
could
me,
just,
oh, go
okay,
ahead.
go ahead. Okay, I'll go. All right. So at Salvation and Social Justice, and we work a lot with directly impacted people and folks from the community. And we found that when they are participating in our part of leadership, we get solutions that actually work because impacted leaders aren't guessing at the problem. They've lived it and they understand the root causes, the gaps in the system, and the unintended consequences that others might miss. So the work becomes more than theoretical. It becomes practical, it's precise, it's deeply grounded in reality. We also see a shift in trust because communities begin to see themselves reflected in the work, not as subjects, but as decision makers. That builds credibility, accountability, and ultimately strong outcomes. And maybe most importantly, um, instead of viewing people as problems to fix, we begin to see them as leaders with the wisdom to transform systems. So direct impact folks are just critical to the work that we do.
I can comment on that. I didn't know if you wanted to go to another question or not, Melissa.
Sorry, I wasn't clear enough, but yeah, if you have something to add, I would love to hear from your perspective as well.
Sure. So I bring a different perspective that I'll share in terms of uh, the evolution of me, all right, as a leader. In this sense that the first thing I learned was that lived experiences are the common thread for humanity. And when you know people's lived experiences, you come to find out that most people are not that different in terms of the things that they go through, right there. The culture might be a little different or the timing might be different, but the experience is relatable and it helps build the humanity. Early in my law enforcement career, like most officers, right, I was really trained to figure out what is the problem, kind of come up with a solution, implement them, and see if it worked, right? And that works well for emergencies, but that doesn't work well for humanity always or for people. And so I realized that, many of the challenges that we were trying to solve in my law enforcement career were not really emergencies. They were actually complex social issues that people were living through each and every day. And so I had to understand that communities are not, I believe it was Retha who said, the communities are not problems to be solved. They're actually partners that you have to engage. They know better than you what it is that they need. They know better than you. So I started changing my leadership style to say, okay, what do we think the community needs? And then what is the community telling us that they need? Right. And then I use lived experience to be my starting point for coming up with policy or coming up with implementing some strategy to address a community problem. Because ultimately, they're the ones that are going to live through this. They're the ones who have to experience it. So let them lead it. And as they're leading it through their experience, we shape the policy around that instead of trying to reshape their experience by the policy.
Thank you all so much, Niles. That really directly answers what I was going to ask you next. So I'm going to skip that and ask if you all might be able to offer some like practical guidance to the audience about how you can ensure that policy solutions remain grounded in the voices of the directly impacted people. What are some actionable insights that you might be able to offer?
So to both Retha and Niles' point, I think it's important that you know, folks who are impacted, who have a lived experience, like when there are opportunities for them to help to shape policies, to help for them to help to shape um, programming in our spaces. We ensure that our moms, our birthing moms, and our families are a part of, what is housing going to look like in our birthing center. We include our moms as part of our groups that talk about, what type of supports and services are supposed to be in the birthing centers. Uh, we encourage our partner organizations to have moms from the city to be a part of their boards, to be a part of their committees, and not just, as, this this figure, just there, but to actually be a part of the decision-making process, and to bring forth their lived experience, and to see that reflected in the policies that are created, in the programming that is designed to support them. So we encourage that a lot, with our with our partner organizations, as well as through our sister circles. We take the information that we receive from them to, to design the work that we do.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I agree with Diana. I found that the people closest to the problem should be closest to solving it, right? And so, and with that, you explain to people that it doesn't mean that everything that they recommend will be able to be done, simply because there's all kinds of things, legal responsibilities, budget, and all of those things. But you explain that to people. Um, Most of the time when policies are established, right, community input is done at the end of the process. But if we
Mm-hmm.
really want policies that are going to be effective, if you want community trust and community participation, and if you want the policy to be sustainable, I think the community has to have a seat at the table before the first draft is even developed, right? And so I believe in a three-part process. First, listen before you design the policy, right? Build relationships before you build the policy, and then move beyond representation to partnership, right? This isn't something that should happen to them. This is something that should be co-produced and co-created. So it's not happening to them, they're experiencing this as a part of a solution to a problem that we're all trying to solve. That's my piece.
Yeah, and I just like to add that in addition to including lived experience folks in policy making, we also need to recognize that we need to push for investing, um, and not investing primarily in enforcement, but also investing in stability, like housing and health and education and economic opportunity. So it's a big portion of the work that we do at Salvation and Social Justice is to make sure that in addition to those policies, that there's an investment back into the community so that there is something that they can work with in order to make a transformation in the community.
Retha, this was not in our run of show, but I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about the practice of hiring folks with lived experience and what that brings to your organization, into your community.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, we started out in all policy in making sure that, the work that we do include the folks who are in the community, residents of the community, making sure that they help shape the solutions. So the best way to get to the folks who have lived experience is to talk to the folks who have lived experience and ask them to make recommendations in the community on who they think will best um, match the jobs that we're looking for. So, for example, if we're doing, violence intervention, And we're looking for people who need to go into communities in specific parts of the community to help, talk to the people in the community, help address the violence that's going into the community. We need to know that those folks can go there, that they're known in that community, that people respect them, and that they can make an impact. So, it's not just lived experience, but making sure that you're putting talent in the right place. But once you put the talent in the right place, you have to nurture them, right? You have to make sure that they have what they need. They may need technical, skills. So you might need to bring in someone who's going to help them hone in on their technical skills. So whatever they need, you wrap around them. But the most important thing is to ask for the right talent in the community and then nurture that talent.
Thank you, Retha. I am so glad that you were willing to pick up that question on the fly because it's such an important part of the conversation. And thank you to everyone who answered those questions. I am going to move us on a little bit now and start to talk about community safety in terms of prevention and anticipation and the practical application. So as we move into this next section, I want to shift our focus from reacting to harm toward anticipating and preventing it. Public safety doesn't start in the moment of crisis. We've established that. It starts long before in support, in relationship, and in resources that keep communities strong. So from your point of view, what does it take to make that shift from reaction to true prevention? And let's start with you, Diana.
So I think it really starts with a willingness to want to address the system, right? I think as we've been discussing today about, wanting to ensure that folks who have lived experience are a part of the process, the shift comes in for, those who are policymakers to have a willingness to listen. That for me, I think that's where it starts. When I talk to folks, the things that they're most concerned about is that there's often not a willingness to listen and not and just when they are part of conversations, it's merely to check a box. And so there has to be a willingness to listen, and then a sincere desire to want to change and shift. And I think that's where we start.
Niles, I would love to hear from your dual perspective as a person with law enforcement professional experience and a faith leader. What do you think it takes to make that shift?
I think the primary thing is changing the posture of the entire public safety system, right? Because what does the entire public safety system pay attention to? When does it engage? If you look at it now, right, most public safety systems are organized around what you might call a reactive loop. Something happens, somebody calls for help, right? Somebody responds, police, fire, EMS, whoever. There's some kind of action that takes place or investigation, and then this whole ugly system gets involved wherever it goes, right? And then the cycle just keeps repeating itself over and over and over and over again. I think prevention takes place when we look upstream and start asking different questions, right?
Mm.
Uh, how do we define what a problem actually is, right? Because sometimes what one person thinks a problem is not a problem. And sometimes I
Mhm.
think it includes shifting the timeline of intervention, right? Early childhood development, family stabilization, school engagement, housing stability, employment access, building up those structures first so that you have less activity downstream. And so I think from a public safety perspective, it's the difference between responding to an incident to reducing the likelihood that that incident will occur. And if we can do that, I think that then the shift will be more effective. And I think people will be more responsive to it because you're actually meeting needs before a problem actually stirs up.
Space for any other responses, and if not, I will queue up the next question. Okay, so one of the things that is really integral to this work is being sure that we have a finger on the pulse of the happenings within our communities, so that we can not only navigate the landscape, but also anticipate our next moves. So what are some of the ways you can anticipate what's coming in our communities? What are the signs and signals that folks should be looking out for?
I can jump in here. So I think relationship-driven anticipation really improves safety because it allows us to see and respond to harm before it escalates into crises. When you're in a real relationship with people, when you're listening, building trust, and staying connected, you don't have to wait for data reports or emergency calls to tell you something is wrong, right? You can hear it in conversations, you can see it in behaviors, you can feel it in the community's energy. So that kind of proximity allows you to act early with care, support, and intervention before situations reach a breaking point. It also builds trust, which is essential for safety. So people are far more likely to share what they're going through, ask for help, and accept support when they feel seen and respected. That openness creates opportunities to address issues like trauma, instability, or conflict in real time rather than after harm has occurred. And ultimately, relationship driven application makes safety more proactive and community led. So instead of systems reacting from a distance, communities are engaged, aware, and equipped to respond to their own needs. That leads to solutions that are more responsive, more humane, and more effective. Because when you're connected, you don't just respond to crises, you help prevent them.
And just to add to what Rita just shared, I think also, as faith rooted organizations and churches, nonprofit organizations that are faith led, it is just important for us to be present in the communities. So you know so folks see us, not just folks coming in and looking for support, but us going out um, into the community to Rita's point, understand the pulse, understand what's going on. Um, you know, Showing up at the neighborhood association meetings, showing up, at the bodega on the corner, just showing up, so that again, to Rita's point, we're building trust. Folks are willing to trust us, and you are able then to hear the things that are impacting the neighborhoods where you are located. You're building those relationships with the people who are in the neighborhoods. You're building the relationships with the shop owners. You're building the relationships with the children that are in the neighborhood. So folks need to see you. You need to be present.
I agree. I was thinking about there's a scripture in First Chronicles that describes the men of Issachar as men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. And basically, that's the leadership posture I think that's required if we're going to have real impact and actually have an idea of what's coming down the road. Um, anticipating what's coming in a community, it really requires attentiveness. And I agree with both Diana and Retha in that you have to be connected to the people. You have to look at the shifts in behavior, whether they're connection, if they have trust or lack trust, if there was trust and now it's lost, what happened? You have to pay attention to the environment, its stability, who's investing in it, who's not investing in it, what's missing. And you really, really have to pay attention to all of the systems, all right? Because systems create patterns. And those patterns show you what the demands are. Those patterns identify what the strains are. And those patterns will show you what coordination needs to take place. And so I think in order to know what's coming down the pipe, there has to be a mind shift change in leaders to really be engaged enough to look for what the shifting will be, and to be like those men of Issachar who understood the times and knew what should be done.
Well, that leads us really well into this next question. And I'm wondering if you all can talk a little bit about how your faith values shape how you approach public safety or community safe differently.
Well, I guess I could start. I think faith institutions are uniquely positioned to lead this work, including myself, because this is who we are, and have always been. But sometimes, of course, we go astray. So, as a reminder, I'm going to just kind of rattle off a few things. So, the church should function not just as a place of worship, but as a center for community care, education, advocacy, and mutual aid. So this is all the work that we've been talking about, right? What should make faith institutions especially powerful in this moment, right? Are three things, and this is including the institutions and the folks who go to the church. So first, we should be deeply rooted in the community. So we are not outsiders trying to serve a community. We are part of the community, should be part of the community. So we walk with people through birth and struggles, transitions and loss. So that proximity gives us trust. And trust is essential when you're talking about healing, prevention, and safety. Second, we should hold both moral authority and relational influence. I keep talking about relational, right? People should not just hear our message, they should trust our intent. The moral grounding allows us to reframe like public safety, not just as a policy, but as a moral and spiritual responsibility. And third, we should operate as part of the social a safety net. So long before formal systems stepped in, churches provided food, shelter, mentoring, counseling, and care. So faith communities have always filled the gaps, serving as what many call the invisible safety gap or safety care or safety net for those in need. And now, more than ever, where we are right now in this society, I believe faith communities must be radically inclusive and non-judgmental if they are truly going to serve the whole community. This requires, courageous faith leaders to stand boldly, challenge any comfort, and call their congregations to welcome and embrace all people, even when that stretches beyond traditional norms, because that is the very heart of our work in social justice. And maybe most importantly, faith institutions should carry a theology that connects all of this together. We should not separate the spiritual from the social. We should understand that caring for the whole person in the whole community is centered to our calling. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that one, Rita. Because I think that is as a faith community, we, all of our faiths, various faiths, whatever your faith tradition is, speaks to, there is somewhere in your faith tradition that speaks to the dignity and humanity of people. And so I believe that that is what makes the faith community uniquely able to address some of the challenges around, the pieces that we're talking about today, the safety around how we support the community. We've been given mandate to do this work. And if you hold that mandate within your heart and within the work that you do, and within your very being, the person that you are, you go out and you do the work. And so if we truly believe the principles, the tenets of our faith, then it is not to say the work will be easy, but it is the work that we are called to do. And so I think that is, that is where we stand as a faith community, that we do the work that we have been called to do. The thing is, making sure people recognize that this is our calling.
The only thing I'll add to that, and I agree with both ladies. The only thing I will add to it is that the thing that excites me about faith communities being involved is that not all faith institutions are structured the same way or have the same abilities, resources, or access, but they all offer something. And when they're all put together, when they all work together, when they synergize their resources and their ideas, their energies, and their abilities, they make a greater impact, right? Faith communities, when we think about it, right, they operate as an everyday infrastructure in the community. They don't respond to episodes. They are at the episode. They're there before the episode and after the episode. They're there weekly. And so they have opportunities to provide services before an emergency arises and then provide comfort when there is an emergency. And this creates a continuous presence. And that continuing presence makes them powerful. The book of Acts talks about how all of the believers came together and made sure that everybody's needs were met. And I think the faith community is in a perfect position to do that.
Thank you all. This is such a courageous conversation, and I'm so grateful that your voices are amplifying this positioning. I want to shift us a little bit to talk about your theory of change. And I'm going to start with you, Risa, because your work reflects a really powerful theory of change. And it's one that centers community, faith, and systems transformation. Can you walk us through how your approach actually creates change from the ground up?
Sure. Can I ask for the slide to be placed up on the screen, please? As I start talking, thank you so much. So salvation and social justice, this is our theory of change. It's community driven that moves from truth telling to transformation. It begins with lament, where we create space for directly impacted people to share their lived experiences through circles and conversations, grounding the work in real community voice. We listen to those who have been closest to harm, that's young people, returning citizens, mothers, families, and community members who have navigated systems that were never designed for them. Their lived experiences shape not only what we fight for, but how we fight. It grounds us in truth. It challenges assumptions, and it pushes us beyond surface level solutions to address the real conditions that we know lead to harm in the first place. This is how lived experience becomes more than a story. It becomes a blueprint. that leads to prophetic outcry, where we elevate those truths, we name injustice and call systems to account. And then from there, we move into rituals of resistance, translating community voice into action through policy, advocacy, and organizing. But we don't stop at policy. We advance to salvation and liberation, where we implement and test community rooted solutions like restorative justice hubs and community led safety models. And most importantly, we also create toolkits, a blueprint to how to reproduce the systems and solutions that we came up with to other communities. Finally, we close the loop, returning to the community for feedback, learning, and refinement, ensuring the work remains accountable, relevant, and responsive. So, in short, it's a cycle from lament to action to transformation and back again, led every step of the way by the community. So, what I'd like to do is quickly kind of share an example of how our theory of change works in real time. So the tragic police shooting of Najee Seabrooks, who was a high-risk interventionist in our sister organization in Paterson, New Jersey, and Andrew Washington in Jersey City, New Jersey, became a catalyst of change in our approach for systems transformation. Our approach and policy and advocacy efforts led to the passage of the Community Led Crisis Response Act, which not only reimagines how we respond to crises with care instead of force, but also directs $12 million into communities to build and lead life-saving alternatives to policing. So it started with lament, right? Salvation Social Justice. We actually held um, held public forums to discuss the force report that was created by New Jersey Advanced Media, which found that New Jersey's system for tracking police force was broken. Um, and so we followed those forums up um, with public hearings. We launched a campaign where we held visioning sessions and community asset mapping, all of which charge communities to to reimagine a safe community and position them as agents of change in leading that effort, and recommendations which would ultimately inform the legislation. So new ideas from public safety came from these discussions, and these stories became even more urgent and undeniable with the tragic losses of Najee Seabrooks and Andrew Washington. So all of that led to a prophetic outcry. We didn't allow these stories to remain private. We elevated them. We named what was happening as not just individual incidents, but systematic failure, and we call for something fundamentally changed. We challenged the idea that policing was the only response to crises. From there, we moved into rituals of resistance, our policy and advocacy work. We worked alongside impacted families, advocates, and partners to shape and put forward a new vision, um, one where communities would respond to crises with care instead of force, and that contributed to the passage of the Seabrooks Washington Community Led Crisis Response Act. So we absolutely use our theory of change to help make this transformation, moving $12 million back into the communities. We're actually trying to build it and implement it now. And once we do that, we'll go back through that cycle and get feedback from the community. So this is an example. It's not abstract, it's practical. It moves from story to strategy to system change and back again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rita, for sharing not only the theory of change, but the practical outcome of doing that work in such a way by following that theory of change and building that framework. We are going to take some time in just a minute to field any questions that the audience might have. So if you do have questions that you would like to ask of our panelists, I encourage you to use the Q&A function. And while I give folks a few minutes to do that, I just want to go back to that word courage, because so much of this work requires a great deal of courage to shift these systems, to continue to speak these truths. I wonder, Niles, actually, if you could speak to the role that courage plays in speaking up for impacted people. And if you
Sure.
can, an example would be great.
Okay, sure. So first of all, we have to look at courage as it's not an accessory, right? It's not an umbrella for the rain. It's a core requirement for doing this kind of work. You have to have courage because you're dealing with people. You're dealing with power dynamics. Let's be honest, right? And you're dealing with helping people who don't have the power to make some change. So you have to have courage. I think of a scripture from Proverbs that encourages us to speak for those who can't speak for themselves. All right, and ensure justice for those who are being crushed by injustice. And so when you think about that as almost like your foundation, you recognize that, speaking up directly for impacted people, you're talking about voices that are sitting at an intersection where they're being crushed by powers that they don't have access to, or policies that they may not have had input to, and they're experiencing real pain. And these are not neutral spaces. Historically, right, we know that there's a lot of tension in these spaces. So courage actually winds up being the tool or the bridge, if you would, between what we know to be true and what we're willing to say out loud. So courage actually is needed if you want to break the silence that systems unintentionally or intentionally create, right? Courage is needed if you want to be honest or tell truth in systems and speak to people in power or speak to authorities that may not see the humanity in those that you are representing. And courage definitely, one of the key aspects of courage is what you need to remain present after you open your mouth. Because we have a lot of people who will open their mouth and then get on a plane and fly somewhere else. But we need people who are courageous enough to say something and then stay put and help. And so as an example, one of the experiences that I had was that we had, in my police experience, we had an opportunity to create a new community policing model. And everybody wanted to talk about what the motive should be, what the theme should be, what the objective should be, but they weren't asking the right people. And so I had to speak to those in charge and stand flat footed and say, this is never, ever going to work. I don't care how much experience you have. This is never going to work until you speak to people in the community and get input from them. And from what I understand, these are some of the things, but I dare not represent the community when they can represent themselves. And I was ostracized a little bit. I was criticized a little bit, but eventually my idea and my opinion took root, and we called for a large community meeting, and people were able to speak their own truth and speak their own ideas. Was I banished? Oh yeah, they were mad at me for a little while, but it was worth it to me because, in all honesty, the communities that they were talking about helping, I didn't live in those communities. I did as a kid, but as an adult, I had moved on. Those communities changed. And so I didn't feel like I was even qualified to speak for those communities. I felt they should speak for themselves. And we were able to get that done. And we made really good progress in developing a new community policing model to affect those particular neighborhoods. So that's my example.
Thank you so much, Miles. Rita, yes.
No, I think he covered it pretty well.
Oh, okay. I thought you were speaking up. Apologies for that.
No, a cough. So let me put myself on mute.
That's okay. You're going to have to come off mute in here in just a second anyway. We still don't have any questions from our audience. Again, if you're in the audience and there's something burning that we haven't covered yet, please do put that in the Q&A. In the meantime, something that I'm wondering is how you all decided where to start. Like, how did you decide which issues to tackle first in your communities?
So I'll start with I'll jump in here. So the CDC, the birthing center has always has been an issue for a while, and the need to address having a space, a culturally congruent space for families, particularly Black moms, to be able to birth in the city of Trenton once again. Um, Folks haven't been able to birth in the city of Trenton since 2011, when the hospital system moved out. But in those conversations with moms, again, when we begin to talk about the social determinants of health and we talk about what makes a community safe and what is safe beyond the violence, right? Um, Families were saying we need to address housing, we need to address, education, we need to address childcare, we need to address food security, we need to address workforce development. And so it started there. It started from those conversations with moms who said, this is what we need. And so, you know, if this is what you need, this is where we begin. And so, in partnership with Salvation and Social Justice and the legislation around supporting workforce around midwifery, and supporting the efforts on a state level to address Black maternal health, and not just, again, we don't want we always say to people, we're not just going to be catching babies, but it's the holistic approach and why it's necessary to address all of those pieces. So it is not by accident that we have the 5 priority areas of the CDC. It is because moms are saying these are the things that will help us to have these safe pregnancies. These are the things that will help us to be able to reduce the stress around our pregnancies, but more importantly, how we can be be in a community that is thriving where things aren't missing.
I can talk about it from a youth justice perspective with Salvation and Social Justice. I mean, there's a lot of data out that kind of spoke to us about the conditions of Black youth in New Jersey. So Black kids are 20, I think 18 to 21 percent more likely to end up in youth prisons than their white counterparts, even though they're, they're participating in some of the same kinds of activities. When we started, it cost about $250,000 per year to incarcerate one Black kid. And now I think it's over $600,000 to incorporate one Black kid. And so, and the I think the budget for the youth justice prison system is like $60 million. So we looked at those stats and said, okay, what are we going to do about this issue? Because we have to really look at how we're going to save our young people and keep them out of prison. Ultimately to close youth prisons. And so, once we said that's an issue, we need to keep young people out of prison, but we need to build something else in the community so that they won't end up in prison. So, of course, we have to then, use our theory of change and go out and talk to folks. And we talked to communities up and down the state of New Jersey, multiple sessions, and asked them what they would like to see. And that's how we came up with the Restorative Justice Hub and Restorative Justice Principles, by asking folks in the community. So that's how we got started.
My aha moment came as a result of being a patrol officer early in my career. My partner and I were working at night, and we apprehended two young men who had stolen a car and were driving recklessly through the city that evening. One of the young men that we apprehended was 10 years old. And so that early that next morning, because it was overnight, we were directed to take him home to his mom. And when we got to his home, his mother opened the door and she looked at us and she looked at him and she said, "You keep him, I don't want him." And she slammed the door. And that was my first experience of children not being wanted. I didn't have that experience, even though I grew up in the same city. I never experienced anything like that. I never saw anything like that. And that was my aha moment, that what kind of future can he have if his own mother doesn't want him? Like what's going to happen to him? He's 10 now. What will happen in 10 years? What will happen in 20 years? And so that's when I started working with other people within the church that I was in at the time. I wasn't even a pastor or a minister at the time. I started working with other people there to find out what we could do to help young people who are living in conditions where they're not wanted by their families, and their behavior is clear evidence that they're acting out, looking for attention, looking for love, looking for someone who really cares about them. But that was my introduction to this kind of work, and the need for this kind of work, and what I could do. My little part, whatever my little part could be, I was interested in making sure I did that.
Thank you all so much. Yes, Diana.
I just wanted to add, so when Niall said, and I think, one of the things that comes out of this conversation is that it's like, what is my one part that I can do? If, the folks who are participating, who are viewing, who are, on this call, it's like we all have something that we can do in order to affect change, in order to ensure that we have safe communities. And so it might, your one part is going to look different from the other person's one part. We all have a part to play. We all, even our young people. So like when we work with our young people, it's like, this is your built environment. How do you show up in your built environment? What can you do, right? And so it's not it's not that we should not even that we shouldn't include them. They have to be a part of the conversation as well, right? So we all have a part to play. We all can do that our one part. So thank you, Niles. I appreciate that.
And thank you, Diana, because we're up against our final question and the clock. So my question that I feel like you might have just answered, Diana, is just one final thought, one sentence that you hope that this audience will walk away with and be able to apply right now in their own communities or in their own work.
For me, it's just to show up and again going back to identifying that one thing in your community that you can be a part of. If it's a faith-rooted organization, somewhere, if you're part of a faith-rooted organization, what can you do within your organization? What can you do within your church or your ministries? But how can you show up and be supportive of ensuring that communities are thriving and people are having their needs met.
I think I would add that we should stop the belief that change has to be perfect before it can begin. Like waiting often looks like, more planning, more data, more approval, but action begins when we decide that what we already know is enough to take the first step, right? We move when we, trust the voices we've heard. We've talked throughout here about community engagement and listening, trust in the need, we've seen and just respond to it in real time.
And my little piece to that will be that we have to stop confusing certainty with readiness, right? Because oftentimes we believe that we have to have all certainty before we can actually begin. And we're dealing with complex community problems and community systems. And we're never really going to have all of the information, and the conditions are never going to be ideal. So there's going to be some risk, but there are always opportunities. So if you keep waiting, you're going to produce more harm. So let's get to work. Do what you can do.
We close up this session. I just want to say how grateful I am for the wisdom and the honesty that you've all shared today. We've heard how Black faith institutions continue to stand at the center of this work, carrying forward a lineage of care, advocacy, and spiritual grounding. I hope you, the audience, leave here today encouraged by the creativity and courage that exists within our communities, and also challenged to think about your own role in moving this work forward. My hope is that you leave here not only encouraged, but ready to take the next step. Thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights, and thank you to all of you for your time, your attention, and your commitment to building safer, healthier, more just communities. Each of us has a role in shaping the conditions that allow people to feel safe, supported, and connected. Thank you for spending this time with us and for the work that you will carry forward after today. Back to you, Candace.
Thank you, Melissa. As we wrap up today's webinar, I want to extend my sincere thanks to our speakers, panelists, and to each of you for your time, engagement, and commitment to this important work. We hope today's conversation has sparked new ideas, strengthened connections, and highlighted the important role faith communities can play in advancing justice, healing, and community safety. As a reminder, today's session was recorded, and we'll be sending the recording along with any additional resources and materials referenced during the webinar so you can continue exploring these topics and share them with your networks. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you for the work you do every day to serve your communities. We appreciate your partnership and hope to see you at a future event. Have a wonderful rest of your day.